My dad always wanted a son. He got 3 daughters instead. He hated us all, hated my twin sisters, hated my mother, but hated me most of all because I was the last child my mother had before she died. That didn't stop him from treating me like his little boy, didn't stop him from attempting to beat the hatred of my own gender into me. Quit your crying, he'd snap, or you'll end up like your sniveling bitch of a mother. After years of that shit, he was shocked that I grew up as a tomboy. I think he hated that even more because I was just a constant reminder of what he never got to have. My mother died when she was only 27. When I was only 4, the coroner ruled her death a natural passing. Some weird heart complication that took her in her sleep. My dad, though, he says it was because of her family's curse. Whenever I came to him, desperate for more information about a mother I never really knew, he never had much to say. I'm convinced he was just drunk since the day she died. Every woman in her damn family, they die when they're 27. He'd sputter in between belches, his breath reeking of stale beer. I think the real curse is that my mom was the one to die, and not him. I wasn't fully convinced by the ramblings of a perpetually drunk man, but when I lost both of my sisters just months before their 28th birthday, I knew it couldn't be a coincidence. Moira was found murdered, her face practically blasted off by a shooter while she was on a jog. Joy took her own life only days later. I was the one who found her, hanging in the bedroom of her apartment as I came to pick her up for Moira's funeral. She'd been there, swinging from the rafters all night. It's hard to live a normal life when you know you have an expiration date, especially when it encompasses an entire year. I always dreaded my birthday, which from an early age became associated less with fun and birthday cake and more with worry and funeral caskets. But once Moira and Joy died, my next birthday, 25, was the most dreadful day of my life. 26 was worse, 27 unimaginable. This is it, I thought as I closed all of the blinds in my apartment, downing the last drop of vodka in the bottle. This is the last year of my life. 27 has been uneventful, to say the least. Why would I make any long-term plans, forge any meaningful relationships when I know they simply cannot last? The worst part of this last year has been simply not knowing when my impending death is coming. It could have been any day within the last 364. Could be within the next minute. I must admit I became something of a recluse. My windows always shuttered, additional locks installed in my door, letting the phone ring through to voicemail, hiding under my covers with the lights out whenever I got a knock on my door. I stocked up on preserved foods and various goods that I would need to last the year. I was so paranoid that I even covered my mail slot, stuffed a towel in the space beneath my front door. I didn't want anything getting through from the outside world, God forbid. An anthrax letter. Falling off the face of the earth didn't matter much. Anyway, I didn't have friends or family anymore. My mother and both of my sisters were dead, and my dad disowned me when I came out as a lesbian after my sisters died. I moved away and severed contact soon after. The night before my 27th birthday, I started getting these strange phone calls from a blocked number. I've always had anxiety about phone calls, so I just let it ring. The number kept calling, at least once per day throughout the past year. Then the knocking started, once a week at first, but it's only been getting worse, more frequent, and the pounding on my door more frantic each time. Convinced it had something to do with my inevitable death, I've been driven mad by the unknown visitor, especially over the past week. I got ready for bed last night, knowing that tomorrow, today, now, is the day I will turn 28. My time had run out, and I searched for comfort in a bottle of liquor. I didn't find it. I fell into bed, drunk and delirious, and prayed the morning wouldn't come, though I knew it would. I eventually got to sleep, but it was restless and unsatisfying. The kind of sleep where you feel like you have one eye open, always watching. That's why I was quick to wake when the door to my bedroom creaked open early in the morning, before the first sign of light. I shot up in my bed, glancing around my room in a frenzied panic, at first seeing nothing out of the ordinary other than the door, pushed slightly ajar. A closer look revealed something I'd missed, something that sent my heart racing, froze me to my core. Two dark figures stood in the empty space behind the half-open door, unmoving, almost like a pair of statues. Waiting, watching, wordless. "Leave me alone," I squeaked, unable to move, paralyzed in the power of their presence. The shadowy figures instead shuffled out from behind the door, creeping slowly towards me in the dark. I knew this would certainly be the end of my life, the fulfillment of my curse, if I didn't act. Suddenly recalling the self-defense methods I drilled into my mind, I flipped my bedside lamp on to stun the intruders and reached underneath the table to pull the knife I duct taped there a year ago, a 27th birthday gift to myself. As soon as the light flooded the room, though, I knew the blade would be of no use. My intruders were not a pair of assassins, not human ones, at least. In the yellow light of the lamp, I discerned the identities of the dark figures. They were my sisters. Joy stood at the foot of my bed, pale, in that same conservative black dress I'd found her dead in years ago, the one she'd picked out for Moira's funeral. Her head hung parallel to her shoulders, neck grotesquely bent from her hanging. Moira was a few steps behind her. I could only assume it was her, considering the severity of her injuries. She'd suffered a gunshot wound to the head, so brutal that we were not allowed to see her after her death, so intense that it had entirely disfigured her face. The lower half of her face had been reduced to a pit of gore, her jawbone barely attached on one side, her mouth mangled, with only several teeth remaining studded randomly throughout the mess. "Why are you here?" I cried, gathering my knees to my chest and holding them tight. Are you here to take me?" Joy made a feeble attempt to shake her head, the side of her face only brushing weakly against her shoulder. She waited several moments before putting one of her feet in front of the other, moving towards the side of my bed. As I recoiled instinctively, she slowed her pace. Moira trailed after her until they were both beside me. I whimpered as Joy leaned over me, her head flopping forward suddenly with the motion, neck cracking sickeningly. With her lips brushing against my ear, she whispered, She tried." Her speech was labored and wheezing, as if her vocal cords had nearly been shredded. "What do you mean, Joy?" pleaded. Her lips moved against my ear once more, but no sounds came out despite a clear, strenuous effort. Moira wagered an attempt at answering my query, but only succeeded in sputtering blood from the gaping wound in her face, ejecting one of her remaining teeth onto the floor as her jawbone swung precariously, barely hanging on. She raised one hand, slowly curling it into a fist before striking her knuckles furiously against my bedpost. The incessant sound startling me, I forced my eyes shut tight and pulled my knees even closer against my chest. Moira's knocking seemed only to escalate in volume, seemed to go on forever, until, finally, it stopped. I cracked my eyes open to find that both of my sisters had vanished, that the light of early morning had begun to spill in through the slats of my blinds. It was just past 6 o'clock, the 7th of June, the day of my 28th birthday. I was born at 9:26 a.m. Once I learned of the curse, I burned the time of my ultimate expiration into my mind. I only had 3 hours and 16 minutes left to live, if I even had that long. Draping my covers over my head, I resolved to spend the rest of my life asleep. I figured I'd rather pass peacefully in my sleep like my mother did than to suffer a fate similar to my sister's. My plans were interrupted, however, by that damned knocking on the door. The interruption usually didn't come so early in the morning. I decided initially to ignore the strange visitor but pulled the blankets back down soon after as a certain sense of familiarity struck me. The pounding on the door reminded me all too much of Moira's knocking just moments before. It easily could have been a trick of the curse, but something compelled me to approach the door. "What do you want?" I called from behind the barrier, clinging to the relative safety it provided. The reply came from an unfamiliar man's voice. "I just have a letter for you, miss. Just slide it under the door and please leave." I returned, using my bare foot to remove the towel I used to block the small space beneath it. He deposited a bright yellow envelope under the door as I requested. I waited quietly for the sounds of receding footsteps before sliding on a pair of gloves to handle the letter. It was addressed to me, simply by first name and with no address. Carefully, I unsealed the envelope to reveal a birthday card. I hadn't received one in years. Bright, sparkling letters on the front formed the words, "Daughter, you're 27. I scoffed at the sick joke. I hadn't received a birthday card since I was a child, and my dad couldn't even get my birthday right. I didn't think he even knew my address. I cracked it open gingerly to read the message inside. "Laura, if you're reading this, your father has killed me. Don't believe a thing he or the police say. I was not the target of a random attack. I did not die of natural causes, and I certainly did not commit suicide. I would never leave you if I had the choice. The truth is, I died is because I found the truth behind my family's curse and foolishly told your father. He was in on it the whole time, planted in my life by some secret society to eradicate me. To eradicate us. What we have is not a curse. It is a gift of immense power. The power to heal, but the power to harm just the same. We come into our power at the age of 28, a number associated with independence, leadership, and self-sufficiency. An age where we can handle the responsibility such a power inevitably comes with. It's a strong number, and you will come into great strength, though you've always been a strong girl. I hope you've made it this far, but at the same time, I know you have. You were always a feisty little girl for the 4 years I had the pleasure of knowing you, of loving you. You never let anyone tell you what to think or do, especially not your father. Happy birthday, I love you, Mom." I closed the card softly, thinking on the strained words of my sister. Mom had tried to warn them, but they didn't listen. The pieces of the puzzle slid into place. My dad must have murdered Moira, and Joy ended her own life out of grief and a belief that she would inevitably be next. At the time of writing this, I only have 2 hours and 32 minutes until I officially turn 28. Over the past hour or so, I've already begun to feel the power flowing into my body, electrifying as it runs through my veins. I will the towel to reposition itself under the door, and it does so, sliding across the floor on its own. I need to keep myself safe until 9:26 after all. I'm planning on surprising my father with a visit for my birthday. Part 2. I suppose that sounds pretty uneventful on its own, but I'd grown up my whole life believing that I was cursed to die at 27 like the rest of the women in my family. It turns out that the curse was just a way to cover up the truth, that at 28, I would develop extraordinary powers. My father had killed my mother, and at least one of my sisters. Now, I was planning on leaving my story there, but I guess I underestimated just how hungry y'all are for a revenge tale. I wish I could say that what I'm about to tell you is just that, a simple tale of revenge, perfectly executed. A gaping generational wound neatly closed with a few stitches. Having been lied to all of my life, I value honesty. I'm not going to lie to you. If that's what you are looking for, I suggest you stop reading now because an entirely new source of terror has come to light. After I read my birthday card last Sunday, I waited anxiously for the clock to hit 9:26. I'd been feeling the power start to trickle into me early in the morning, but once the second hand made its full lap around to move the minute hand to the tick just after the 5, a jolt of energy passed through my body. It was almost painful, like how I imagined being struck by lightning might feel, but at the same time it felt good. I felt important, powerful, strong. So strong that it even scared me. As I eagerly accepted the full extent of my powers, I found myself in what I can only describe as a vision, an alternate setting that materialized all around me at once. Logically, I knew that I was still in my living room with my feet planted on the familiar wood flooring, but the ground beneath me felt rough, uneven, gritty. I glanced down to find myself standing upon a shelf of sandy rock, just steps from the edge of some great cliff. Fear rendered me mute at the top of that cliff, and I swear I could feel the wind whipping all around me. Hear the waves crashing furiously below, feel the briny ocean water misting my face. I leaned forward, peering precariously over the edge at the churning sea and its infinite black and white froth. I found its movement back and forth, push and pull comforting in its predictability, until it seemed as if something shifted to upset the flow, something unseen but its effects impossible to deny. There was something down there, something huge enough to alter the tides, yet hidden beneath the waves. More horrifying still was the palpable feeling that something wanted me to jump, to dive headfirst into the dark sea below. I felt a presence beneath the waters, something ancient, unseen, vastly more powerful than I could ever hope to be. And whatever it was, it wanted me to jump. But it didn't have to force me, it had all the time in the world, and it could wait. The vision fell apart as quickly as it had materialized, my comfortable reality reconstructing itself anew in mere seconds. I frantically shook my head to oust the troubling image, to rid myself of the powerful draw it had had on me. I had a job to do, but first I had to figure out exactly what I could do. I knew I could move things simply by willing it to happen with my mind, but I was startled by the sudden ease of it. Focusing on a glass of water on the table, I attempted to move it just slightly to the left, but it instead flew off the surface, shattering as it hit the wall. I rushed to clean up the mess, plucking shards of glass from the carpet, groaning at the wet spot. To my surprise, once I glanced down at the dampened carpet, droplets of liquid started to rise from the floor until the spot had vanished. The condensation suspended in midair. It's hard to explain, but I just moved it until I finally released to deposit the water in the sink. Before you say anything, I know it was stupid to test this out on something so fragile, but my powers didn't exactly come with an instruction pamphlet. A dull ache grew in my heart as I realized I should have been learning this with my mother, and I longed for her more than I had in years. Like a young child desperately reaching up with outstretched arms, I wanted my mommy. I couldn't help but think of the fear I felt the first time I got my period. It sounds silly, but I was bleeding and I thought I was dying, simply because I didn't have my mom there to explain it to me. And my dad couldn't be bothered to parent his child. My dad, the thought of him came with an overwhelming rage. With my senses alive in a way they'd never been before, I felt every cell in my body teeming with kinetic energy until the light bulb in the lamp beside me burst. I hesitated as I pondered the vision, but none of that was important just then. It was time I paid my old man a visit. Though he could never repay me for the losses I'd endured, I intended to collect the one thing that would come close, his miserable life. I started for my room to pack a small bag, but before I knew what had happened, I'd slammed head first into my bedroom door. "Shit," I muttered, rubbing a palm over what would certainly be a bruise forming across my forehead. I figured then that I could move much faster now, that I'd have to be careful. This certainly made preparing for my impromptu trip easier, though, so I was down in the garage much quicker than expected. I slid into my car and slipped my key in the ignition. A familiar paranoia forced me to hesitate before opening the garage door, but I pushed through it just as I pushed the button to meet the outside world for the first time in a year. Wincing as the morning light spilled into the dark room, I guess I forgot just how bright the sun really is. I popped open the glove box to retrieve a pair of sunglasses. I put them on before pulling out of the garage, out of the safety I'd clung to for so long. The drive was fairly ordinary, though fear set in as I thought on all of the questions that remained unanswered. Why had my father killed my family? Why lie about some curse? And, most unnerving of all, who had delivered the letter? Was it just some trick to get me out of hiding? Was I wandering into a trap? To avoid spiraling deeper into uncertainty, fear, and worry, I spent some time thinking on my past, about my mother's death, then both of my sisters within days of one another years later. I recalled coming out to my dad soon after that in a desperate plea for acceptance, for love from my one remaining family member. Then I thought on his hateful response and the traumatizing attack I endured weeks later that solidified my decision to cut all ties and move away. We hadn't spoken in all of those years, but I was ready to face him, at least I hoped. I couldn't be sure what awaited me, couldn't be sure at all. I parked on the street across from our old family home 6 hours later, where his old Navy truck sat in the driveway. I took a moment to collect myself at his front door, tightening my ponytail as I steeled myself for the task at hand. Then, I directed my energy into the barrier until it exploded inward, allowing my body to carry me at full speed into the living room where I knew I'd find him. As expected, he was sitting there. What I didn't expect to see was the gun he had pointed at his head. I took hold of it with my mind, flinging it across the room. "Elora?" he stammered, a dumb look on his face. What the hell are you doing here? The hell are you doing, Dad?" I retorted, gesturing to where the gun had fallen with a nod of my head. "How did you find me? Why did you send the letter?" A perplexed look crossed his features, one that told me he had no idea what I meant. His lack of knowledge did little to comfort me. Someone had still found me, had drawn me out of hiding. At that moment, I think he realized the situation he'd found himself in, what I intended to do. He started to scramble up from his chair, but I redirected my focus on his body, pressing him back into it. "You don't get to leave, Dad," I seethed. He coughed as I increased the pressure on his chest. "For once, you will listen to me." He strained against my influence, but he was stuck, and he knew it. "I know you killed Mom and Moira, maybe Joy, too. I know you lied about the fucking curse." I started, a flicker of anger surging as I acknowledged the harsh truth aloud. But the question I can't stop asking myself is, why? Why wait so long to kill us? Why even have us at all? Hesitating, he glanced frantically around the room for escape. I glared at his hands in his lap, then brought my attention to his thumb, filling it with my energy until the bones within shattered, an ivory shard piercing through his flesh. As I moved my stare to his index finger, he wailed in agony, interjecting, "No, don't. No. Okay. Shit." He took a deep breath as blood spurted from his maimed appendage. I was supposed to have a son. When your mother failed to provide one, I was told to kill her off, to wait to see if you or your sisters could have a son. I just did as I was told. A cowardly response from a cowardly man. "Who told you?" I pressed, pulling his index finger back slowly, waiting. He didn't respond until after I'd snapped the digit at the knuckle. Please," he begged, tears running down his wrinkled face. He looked at his mangled hand, horrified as his middle finger began to lift next. Some sort of cult? They breed the women in your family, the women are killed under the curse, and their sons quietly taken away. I don't know what they want with them, but they said all I had to do was give them a son, then kill your mother, your sisters, you, and I'd be set for life. But you and your sisters, you bitches, you weren't having any children. Especially not you. When you told me that you'd gone against God, I realized that you'd never have any kids. that you were the only one left. So I took measures into my own hands. With that admission, I crumpled his entire hand into itself, his splintered bones jutting out at all angles. You don't mean? I breathed, my voice cracking despite my efforts not to give him the satisfaction of having hurt me. He groaned in pain before returning with a low, guttural laugh. You didn't think that attack was random, did you? He asked, wheezing. Harsh memories of the brutal invasion forced upon me. The assault I'd endured resurfaced all at once, suddenly taking on a new meaning as I understood my father's part in my trauma, that he'd sent my attacker. Both my focus and my hold on him broke. He leapt up, surprisingly quick on his feet after years of sedentary alcoholism. I attempted to will him back to his original position, but I couldn't. I felt like a little girl once more, cowering by the stairs as her daddy's shadow loomed closer. I was weak, powerless, again in the face of my father, a man who'd done nothing but hurt me, a man who'd ruined my life in more ways than I could have possibly known. I tore after him, through the kitchen and down the hallway, until I finally cornered him, taking hold of him and slamming him into a wall. A salty odor perfumed the air as a wind swept through. Did it make you feel like a big fucking man to take everything from me? To kill my mother? To take my sisters away? I screeched in an unearthly bellow. An incomprehensible power flowed in and out of me. I watched, frozen, as the bones of his feet crushed all at once. He howled as the crunching progressed up his lower legs, knees popping, then further still. By the time his thigh bones snapped in a gruesome compound fracture, his mouth just hung open. Did it make you feel strong to dash? And despite the magnitude of power coursing through me, I fell silent, unable to complete the sentence, unable to say it aloud. Your own fucking child, Dad. I took a deep, calming breath before willing the flesh of his face in alternate directions. A fissure formed first in the center of his forehead, then splintered down the bridge of his nose, ripping his face in two. Your little plan worked, though, Dad. I did get pregnant. I got rid of it, of course. I teased, leaning forward to add in a whisper, I wonder if it was a boy. He opened his mouth to fight back, but I was done listening. Do they know I'm alive? I demanded, widening the growing wound until the two sides had separated completely. They didn't, he sputtered, blood dribbling out of his lying mouth. But they sure as shit will now. And they were on their way already. He was right. It wasn't wise to stick around. I pulled my knife from my back pocket, positioning the blade at one side of his neck before dragging it across his throat until I'd sliced him ear to ear. I could have killed him with my newfound powers, but this is something I wanted to do by hand. The relief it brought was short-lived. I returned to my car and immediately set a course back for home. I needed answers, and I needed them yesterday. I could no longer ignore the power of the illusion I'd experienced that morning. I'm hesitant to admit it even now, but I found myself back there on that cliff again in my father's house. The clamor of the waves pounding against rock drew me in, forcing me to step to the very edge, forcing me to stare into the sea far below. A feeling of unbridled hatred extended itself to me there. That time, I didn't attempt to rid myself of the strange vision. That time, I welcomed it, and I lost myself for a moment, surging with uncontrollable power, a mere spectator as his lower half was maimed. More than that, I said I wouldn't lie to you, and I won't, but I did lie to my father. I didn't get rid of my child in the way I'd insinuated. Part of me wanted to prove that I could be a better parent than he was, but I knew I couldn't. So I gave him away. I sped down the highway home infinitely more terrified than when I'd left. I needed to find the source of the letter. I needed to figure out what the hell the visions meant. I needed to know if I'd unwittingly opened myself to something sinister. And more importantly, I needed to know that my child was safe from the cult that so desperately wanted him. I need to find my son. Part 3. Thank you all for your comments and messages making sure I'm staying safe, offering suggestions, highlighting potential clues, and bringing possible warning signs to my attention. You've been instrumental in my journey not only to exist past 27, but to understand where I've come from, where I'm going, and how to make this all right. For me, that started with making sure my son was safe. After my, now late, father revealed a cult was breeding the women of my bloodline for sons, I was terrified for my own child. As I made the long drive back home, speeding far over the limit yet somehow not quickly enough, questions plagued my mind. What could they possibly want with him? Had they already found him? What would they do to him, or what had they already done? They had already orchestrated the murder of my sisters, my mother. I wouldn't put it past them to harm him, or me, now that they'd surely found the mangled body I'd left behind. Now, I didn't mention my son straight away because I don't think I have the right to call myself his mother. I gave birth to him almost 4 years ago, but I certainly had no part in raising him. I never expected to get pregnant in my life, and I certainly never expected to keep a pregnancy that was conceived through an assault, but part of me wanted to prove I could be a better parent than my father was. In the months leading up to his birth, though, I knew I couldn't be that for him. I was terrified I would end up like my father, and it felt selfish to put my child through the same grief of losing a mother so young. Back then, I thought I still had an expiration date. I gave him up to a couple who couldn't conceive on their own. They were overjoyed to take him. I didn't want to hang around and confuse him, but his new parents agreed to maintain contact in case of medical emergency. I clung to this glimmer of hope on the trip home, knowing that as soon as I got back all I needed to do was find their contact information. It didn't take long minutes after pulling into my garage. I was already dialing their number. I whispered soft please into the receiver as I waited for their answer. It was late by then, but this could not wait until morning. The line had almost rung through to voicemail when a confused woman answered with a groggy greeting. Immediately, words spilled from my mouth like vomit, jumbled and rushed. I wasn't about to tell her what had happened that day, so I just told her I'd had a bad feeling about her son, that I needed to know he was okay. Her long, exhausted sigh and hesitance to answer sent my heart racing. When she finally spoke, my blood ran cold. She offered an apology, saying that he'd been placed with another family a year prior due to unexpected behavioral issues. Mainly, he had a knack for breaking things, no matter how closely they watched him. She attempted to reassure me by insisting she'd gone through an agency that actively sought out problem children, that he'd been placed with a family more up to the challenge. She couldn't provide much information on his new family, but she knew that he was still in state. Her answers were infuriatingly vague and noncommittal. I knew I wouldn't get much more from her, so I hung up the phone after she agreed to forward me whatever information she had on the adoption and the name of the agency. A simple Google search made it clear that it wasn't even a real organization in the first place. I spent the next few hours agonizing over the whereabouts of my son, leaving frantic messages at any agency I could find, though I knew they wouldn't hear them until morning. I tried to tell myself that perhaps the agency had just been renamed, but it seemed unlikely. I was left distraught and terrified for my child. Part of me just knew that the cult already had him. It took over a week of sleuthing, but I'm ecstatic to say that I did, indeed, find the location of my son with the meager information provided. He was still in state, but I live in a pretty large state, so another long journey. I made contact with his new mother, who agreed to a visit just so I could check up on him. I thought maybe she understood the whole mother's intuition thing. I packed my things and piled into my car, setting off immediately. Only about 20 minutes in did I start to entertain the idea that this was most certainly a trap. I'd had a bad feeling about going to my dad's, but I had the element of surprise on my side then, and that was certainly gone now. Pure terror circulated through my system that whole drive, my hands jittering and barely able to grip the wheel. In the late afternoon, I arrived at a beautiful house. One of those houses that seems too good to be true, one of those houses that you know is just a facade for familial dysfunction. I know because I used to live in one of those. As I pulled up, I took a moment to ready myself in the car, as if I was waiting in the wings, rehearsing my lines one more time before going on stage. As I looked out, I swear for a moment I could see a figure in the window, something pale, watching. My blood ran cold. It didn't seem to move when I saw it. Instead, cocked its head slightly, curious. Nervously, I exited the car and knocked on the door. A gaunt young woman in a white summer dress cracked it open. "Oh, hi, Laura?" she squeaked, visibly flustered. She raked a hand of bony fingers through her stringy brown hair as she pulled the door wide open. "I'm Catherine. Come on in." Tentatively, I trudged into the mansion on the thick soles of my combat boots, suddenly aware of how clunky I appeared in comparison to her. Light on her bare feet, she was as dainty and delicate as a daisy, yet a hollow look in her eye made her seem wilted. She led me to an immaculate kitchen, offered me a seat. "Sorry to bother you like this," I began awkwardly, clearing my throat. Where is he?" "Oh, he's upstairs," she replied, wandering about the room to fix a couple glasses of water. "Playing with Lucia, his sister." "Cool, cool," I answered, trailing off. Studying her features, I internally remarked at how similar we were in appearance despite our clear differences in mannerisms. Something seemed so familiar about her. When she turned her back to me to open a cupboard, it all became clear. A cluster of freckles on the back of her left shoulder. One that I'd always insisted gleefully looked just like the constellation Virgo. "Katie," I breathed. She turned to face me. A brief moment of clarity flickered behind her sunken eyes before ultimately vanishing. "Catherine." "Katie," I pleaded. "It's me, your cousin, Elle. I know we haven't seen each other since we were little, but if you're trapped, I can help you. Please, come with me." Drawing a sharp breath in, she responded almost as if rehearsed, recited. "As a daughter of the precipice, it is my destiny, my honor, my place in the order to be sacrificed." Before I had a chance to respond, she was already screeching at the top of her lungs. "Help! Craig!" Focusing on her body, I pushed her into the wall to hold her still, but the damage had already been done. I could hear hurried footsteps plodding down the stairs. An elderly man suddenly emerged in the doorway. Despite the unhinged expression across his face, I immediately recognized him from the old family photos I pored over in my youth, trying to get to know my mother, to get closer to her. "Fuck sake?" I sighed, a hapless attempt to disguise my fear as I recognized him as my grandfather, as my mother's father. I took hold of him immediately, freezing him in place, yet found it difficult to maintain my attention on two living beings with free will at once. My grip wavered between the two until I was able to maintain a consistent, albeit weaker, hold on both of them. But my focus deteriorated entirely when a young boy crept out from behind my grandfather's frame. A pale young boy with chestnut hair and bright hazel eyes full of curiosity. A young boy who appeared nearly identical to my own self at his age, because he was mine. "Do it now," my grandfather demanded, gesturing wildly in my direction. The child hesitated a moment before nodding mutely. He gave me a firm look that I immediately recognized, the one I'd used frequently since acquiring my powers. I braced myself for the impact, but nothing more than a slight vibration overcame me. A weakened version of my own abilities, I assumed. Taking care to avoid the young boy, I returned my stare to my grandfather's body to gather him up in my hold once more. My heart almost stopped as I struggled to make contact with his form, as I realized I didn't have any power at all. I just looked like some stupid asshole, glaring at an old man expecting something to happen. His reaction was one of shock, too, but with an undertone of awe. I knew it, he stammered, gazing at my sudden paralysis of power, his initial joy escalating into uproarious laughter. It's been you all along. The prophecy, Catherine mused, pacing across the kitchen to get a closer look. The one who will put an end to the daughters. She called out to Lucia before kneeling on the tile floor before the boy, laying her forehead on the cool surface. A young girl, perhaps a year older than my son, with near white blonde hair, popped in and followed suit. The whole charade made me sick. You mean to wipe us all out? I sneered, using anger as a front for my clear powerlessness. Your own family? He nodded his head contentedly in return. As it has been foretold, the daughters of the precipice are a danger to this world, too unruly, too unyielding, too powerful. Generations have passed down the promise that one day, one glorious day, a son will be born with the ability to rob the daughters of their abilities, to weaken them so they may be slain. A wicked grin twisted his features as he ruffled the top of my son's hair. And it was you who delivered him to us. And then what? You'll just keep killing any girls born in the future? Any girls alive now? I stammered, looking forlornly, fearfully, at Lucia. You're telling me you're going to kill that little girl right there, right now? The older man simply raised his eyebrows as if to communicate that he had no qualms in doing so. As it has been foretold. His complete detachment from humanity, from reality, left me trembling. I knew it'd all be over if I didn't act quickly. I gazed softly at the young boy. Hey, what's your name, kid? Kid. That's what I've always called him in my mind, just kid. He'd often pop into my mind during the most mundane tasks, and I had no name to call him. I wonder what Kid is doing. I wonder if Kid is okay. I wonder if Kid is happy. I wonder if Kid's family loves him. Blinking in confusion, he stuttered, Eli. Eli. Okay. I breathed, holding my lips tight together to fight off tears. I didn't want to tell you this way, Eli, but these people do not love you. They are using you to hurt innocent people like me, like Catherine, like Lucia. They killed my mom, my sisters. Please let me go, so I can take you somewhere safe. She's a liar, Eli, the elderly man snapped, raving like an absolute lunatic. He drew an ornate blade from his waistband. We need to put her down. Put them all down. Like the vermin they are. His eyes welled over, and I could almost sense the internal battle raging within. Tears finally started to streak his face as the tingling sensation began to ebb. And no, I like my sister. Eli's hold finally broke as he grabbed Lucia by her elbow to flee from the room. I filled the old man with my energy until he was unable to move, as still as a statue. Driving my focus into the knife, I snatched it from him to suspend it in midair. I took a deep, calming breath before catapulting it in his direction. The blade was already out of my mental grasp by the time I realized Catherine had launched off of the floor to lunge in front of the man. The weapon buried deep into her neck, taking her to the ground instantly. I scrambled to help her only to realize I'd never healed before, and I certainly did not know how. She swatted my vague attempts away as she pulled the dagger out. I watched in horror as she plunged the blade back into her chest, gasping. A delighted grin spread across her face in her last moments. An overwhelming surge of anger flared within me, both at my grandfather and at myself for Catherine's demise. I closed my eyes to steady my emotions but found myself back on that cliff as soon as I opened them, kneeling at its very edge. Whipping wind chapped my face as I gazed at the churning black rapids below. Just beneath the surface, I could get a clearer view of the shadowy mass below. Dynamic in its shape, seeming to stretch and move in every direction, shifting constantly, amorphous and vague, yet clearly belonging to one collective intelligence. Chittering whispers arose from below, the individual words indiscernible yet the message entirely clear. Jump. I furiously shook my head in response to the command, to rid myself of its enticing pull. Reality materialized back around me. A pool of blood had spread beneath me, soaking through the knees of my jeans. With the crash of the waves subsiding, I could hear a low, guttural moan behind me. I turned to find my grandfather in pieces on the floor, still alive yet clearly in agony. His top half was torn from his legs, which lay motionless across the room. Slick visceral gore trailed from where he'd been severed, ragged and uneven. I rose to my feet to finish him off, though I'm afraid to admit I wasn't aware I'd even started in the first place. He whimpered as I followed the trail of blood towards him, but traded cowardice for fury once I crouched beside him. They'll find you, he strained through gritted teeth. His face was pale and covered in sweat. As it has been foretold. Let them. I seethed before sending all of my energy into his neck, snapping it with such force that his head nearly spun. As it has been foretold, my ass. Listen, I hope you all will understand why I've been absent for so long after reading this. I'm now caring for not only my son, but for Lucia as well. I was surprised by their willingness to come with me after I'd slaughtered their previous guardians. But the children had sadly suffered abuse at their hands. It's been an adjustment for sure, but I'm committed to keeping them safe. I resolved to protect them as I drove them to their new home, as I knew we'd all be in danger of being found. I just didn't expect it to happen so quickly. As I pulled up to my place, I knew we'd already been found. I knew because a strange man was there, banging on the door. Part 4. It's been one hell of a week, friends, and I've got a lot to update y'all on. I hope you'll forgive me if I rush through a lot. Like I said, there's a lot I have to say, and I have a job to get back to. Anyway, I believe last time I left off on arriving home from my trip to get my son. I ended up finding him with my shit stain of a grandfather, found out my son is some sort of prophecy, and I came home with not only my son, but with the Lucia, the little girl he's come to know as his sister as well. Of course I was happy to be reunited with my child, Eli, but I was terrified now that I knew he was so valuable to the cult behind the death of my mother and sisters. So, I was understandably pretty freaked out to find a strange man knocking on my front door the minute I got home. Laura. Who's that? Lucia squeaked from the back seat. I hadn't even realized that I'd stopped in the middle of the street. I swallowed my fear, pulled into the driveway, and stepped out of the car. Commanding the kids to stay inside, I locked the doors and approached the stranger. "Excuse me," I barked, attempting to appear confident. I wasn't exactly out of the closet with my powers yet, so I was nervous about what could happen. "Who are you? Why are you here?" The man turned to face me, a grin plastered across his face. "Laura," he replied almost nostalgically, as if he knew me. I was sure I'd never seen him before, and I think I'd recognize him if I had, considering the raised pink scar across his left cheek. He had the rough, rugged appearance of a man who'd seen too much. "Answer me?" I demanded, gaze firmly locked on him. If he made any sudden movements, I had to be ready. He remained where he stood, seemingly attuned to my apprehensions. "It's me, Laura. It's Uncle Job." I couldn't help but laugh at whatever mind games he was attempting as I hardened my stare, freezing him in place. I hadn't seen my Uncle Job since I was little, but my memory wasn't that poor. He was my mother's twin. He had the same spattering of freckles across his pale face and light brown hair that I have, with his olive skin and tight salt and pepper crew cut. The man before me looked nothing like Job, nor anyone in my family. "Let's try that again," I breathed, inching closer towards the stranger. "Tell me the truth." I could sense a flicker of fear within him, within me as well. If they'd found me already, I knew I was screwed, but I'd have to deal with that later. The man was silent for a few long moments, and then he began to sing. All the little girls dancing on the cliff tops, all their little bracelets jingling in the breeze. He started, the tune jaunty, strangely familiar. All the little girls. Suddenly their dance stops dash, and all the little girls jump down into the sea. I finished, eyes welling with tears. An old nursery rhyme I didn't even know I'd retained. One my Uncle Job had taught me while we reenacted the scene with my dolls. I relinquished my hold on him. Why have you come? I'm here to help, Elle. They're after you. Won't be long until they find what they're looking for." He sighed, nodding his head towards the car, towards Eli. I knew I had to keep my guard up, couldn't trust anyone in the family anymore. But he was always so kind, so gentle, nothing like my father. Something in him seemed genuine. I made a split-second decision to hear him out. I ushered the kids out of the car into the house and allowed Job inside. I was terrified I'd made the wrong choice, but figured I'd at least be able to use the full extent of my powers if I needed to behind closed doors. I think Job knew it too. After getting the children settled in my room for a nap, I sat Job down on the couch in the living area. I got him a glass of water, though I never let him out of my direct line of sight. It wasn't just me I had to worry about anymore. "Tell me everything," I rushed, pulling a chair to face him. "I know you have no reason to trust me," he answered, a deep frown on his weathered face. "I wouldn't trust me either, but you have to understand. My father raised me to believe that the women of our family are evil. He raised me to believe in the prophecy dash." Inhaling sharply through my teeth, I cut him off. "Yeah, he told me about that. Before I killed him." Job nodded almost enthusiastically, his eyes widening. Good riddance. He wanted me to fulfill the prophecy so badly, but when I didn't grow to display any powers, he appointed me as your mother's monitor. The name itself struck fear into my heart. Who had been monitoring me? As your mother's monitor, I was to take an active role in her life, to keep tabs on her, to make sure she didn't escape before she turned 28. Despite the remorse evident in his tone, both terror and anger surged within me. Who is my monitor?" I asked reluctantly. "Your father. Killed him too?" I blurted, if only to settle my own nerves. Job smirked. "I probably would have been your monitor too, but I defected from the cult soon after you girls were born. Your mom was a fighter, so they made sure I kept a close eye on her. Ironically, spending so much time with her forced me to critically examine the ideologies my father had instilled in me until they started to unravel. And when I got to know you and Joy and Moira, I finally saw the truth. I couldn't comprehend the possibility of evil within you girls. Knew it couldn't be right to snuff out the light you brought to the world. I started digging, found out some hard truths. Turns out I was being monitored too," he stated with a sad laugh, tears pooling in his eyes. "I managed to warn your mother about the cult, the fathers of the precipice, before they removed me, before they killed her." I shook my head vigorously, fearfully reminding myself that this could easily be a setup. Besides, there was still the matter of his appearance to clear up. "How can I trust you? You don't even look like yourself. When your mother was murdered, I lost my best friend. I wanted nothing more than to dismantle the fathers, but I knew they were looking for me. I scoured the internet for solutions. After years in hiding, I found just that in a strange boutique, one where you can walk out in an entirely new appearance, he explained, gesturing to the new features he'd been granted. I don't expect you to trust me, your sisters didn't because they didn't recognize me. But I know you are my only chance at ending the Father's cycle of killing now, once and for all. Tentatively, I allowed myself to put my trust in him. I elected to keep Eli's powers secret, terrified of what might happen if the man I'd let into our lives turned out to be just as bad as other family members I'd been reunited with recently. I was constantly on edge, felt as if I had to sleep with one eye open again. That kind of paranoia is all too familiar to me, like the curse I'd believed would take me all of my life was renewed. But this time, I knew the danger to my life, to Eli and Lucia's lives, to be real. As I got the children accustomed to their new home, Job spent the next weeks attempting to infiltrate the fathers of the precipice, to discern the location of their headquarters. He insisted that many young boys were held captive there, guarded by the fathers. He painted a horrifying picture of the abuse he'd suffered there, the indoctrination forced upon him. Between strategizing with Job and playing with the children, I spent long hours training myself and bolstering my discipline. After I'd put the kids to bed one evening, I found myself plagued by guilt, recalling how Catherine had died at my hands, how I couldn't heal her. I chased the memory with 6 shots of vodka and spent the rest of the night alternating between dragging a razor across my skin and willing the wounds shut to put my mind at ease. I must admit that, despite the powers I had at my disposal, I feared going up against so many people hellbent against my survival. It was hard enough trying to control 2 people last time. I was terrified how I would fare against the dozens of men Job approximated would be waiting for me. But I knew I had to try if what he said was indeed true. When Job shot out of his seat last week, I immediately knew that he'd found what he was looking for. He'd been perched on that chair in front of his computer so long that I thought he might have grown attached to it. My uneasiness escalated to new heights as I understood he'd found the place where I'd meet my fate, whether good or bad. He called me over to show me his screen. He typed in the address to show an image of my destination. A sprawling green lawn out front, a towering white mansion. It was almost a day's drive away, but it was within reach. And although I was scared out of my mind of what might await me there, I wanted to go. I needed to finish what I'd started. Job and I made arrangements to leave the next morning, though we argued over how to handle the children. I didn't trust anyone to watch them, yet I refused to take them with me. They wanted Eli more than they wanted me, and I knew they wouldn't hesitate to kill Lucia. It seemed like there was no solution. I insisted on going alone, but Job wouldn't hear it. We agreed to settle it in the morning, so I put the kids to bed while Job lay down to rest on the couch. I slipped out of the house in the middle of the night. It was certainly a risk leaving the children with Job, but I'd come to realize that he was the only person I felt like I could trust. I again feared this was a misstep, but I prayed otherwise. I set a course for the mansion that housed the fathers of the precipice and quietly pulled out of the driveway. I realize that each time I update you all, I mention how terrified I am as I make whatever trip I'm on. This time, though, I felt like I was nearing closer to certain death with each mile covered. I worried constantly about Eli and Lucia. I wanted nothing more than to come home to them, so I resolved to do just that, though it seemed overly optimistic, naive. As I drew closer to my destination, I found myself panicked, jittery. I'd pulled over to nap in my car, but it was a restless sleep. Still, the sooner I was finished with the fathers, the sooner I could return home. I parked about a mile away, opting to walk the remaining distance. The estate was even more lavish in person than the pixels on Job's screen could possibly display. I felt dwarfed by its size and feared it as if it were some massive predator. Its enormous arched door the mouth I was willingly striding towards. This time, though, I wasn't looking for answers, wouldn't be asking any questions. Job had instructed me where I needed to go to rescue the children. I thrust the door open to find a large entryway with 2 marble staircases leading up to an overhang on the 2nd level. A man stood, frozen, on one of the steps. I snapped his neck with no hesitation. Within seconds, more men spilled onto the 2nd floor balcony before clambering down the stairs. One drew a gun, pointing it at my chest. I redirected his aim before forcing him to empty the chamber into his mouth. I forced another off the overhang, slamming him face first into the marble flooring. But they kept coming one, after another, closer and closer. I took out a few more by releasing the chandelier from the ceiling to crush them. But as soon as I felt I had the upper hand, more men trickled downstairs. More came at me from the hallways on either side of me. Panicked, overwhelmed, and terrified, I felt a pair of arms seize me from behind, saw the herd of men closing in on me, their faces warped with hatred and disgust. I shoved as many of them away as I could, but I was merely buying time, and I was barely doing that considering how many there were surrounding me, too many to control on my own. Each attempt grew feebler, weaker as I felt myself fatiguing rapidly. I knew it was over then, yet as I began to accept my fate, I started to hear the faint sounds of waves breaking against tough rock, of wind whistling all around. My surroundings began to fade, giving way to that same old scene that had tormented me since I first received my powers. There was the shelf of rock, the churning black rapids down below, the whipping wind. But there was something else there this time, something that chilled me to the bone. There were girls. Not just little girls, but teenagers and young women, too, all in flowing white dresses with gleaming silver adorning their wrists. At first sight, it seemed almost as if they were dancing, in constant movement, moving in pairs, switching partners. All the little girls, dancing on the cliff tops. The horrified looks on their faces made it clear, though, that this was not a joyous occasion. They were saying goodbye. Their gowns thrashed about in the wind as they whispered softly to one another, tears streaking their faces. In lieu of embracing, they reached out to hold another's hands in theirs tenderly before moving on to the next. This was all they could do. Their wrists were shackled. All the little girls, bracelets jingling in the breeze. A man's bellow pierced through the tragic scene, startling both me and the group gathered on the cliff. Just behind me, a collection of men began to advance upon the women and girls, brandishing knives in their hands. I leapt back at the sight, but they didn't seem to notice me, only seemed to see or care about the women and girls in white. All the little girls, suddenly their dance stops. They continued forward as the first of the girls jumped, relentless in their pursuit until, screaming in horror, they all launched themselves off the precipice. And all the little girls jumped down into the sea. I rushed forward to stare over the edge of the cliff, watching in terror as the girls thrashed wildly in the water, drowning. Their collective fear, despair, anger overwhelmed me, the power of their emotions nearly suffocating. Wailing, I beat one fist into the rough rock beneath me as, one by one, they tired, their bodies ceasing to sink deep below. The sea enveloped them until it appeared to me just as it had before, the dark, churning rapids. So fearsome, yet at the same time so inviting. There was no time for second guessing. I threw my arms above my head and dove off the cliff. I plunged headfirst into the brisk, briny water. As the sea swallowed me whole, I propelled myself deeper, closer to whatever had been coaxing me down all of this time. Forcing my eyes open, I recoiled as I realized I was not alone. The fallen girls and women swam in a torrent around me, their corpses now bloated and discolored, flesh peeling and hanging off bone in several places. The original daughters of the precipice, forced off the cliff before they could age into their powers. urging myself even further into the dark water. I nearly opened my mouth to gasp as I saw Moira and Joy swimming alongside me, their gruesome appearances still jarring, though their presence was oddly comforting. Moira extended a finger to point. I followed the trajectory with stinging eyes. All my apprehensions came to a screeching halt as a figure came into view. It was my mother. Beaming, she reached her hand up from the depths. I extended mine in turn, kicking my feet to hasten the connection. As soon as my hand grazed hers, a surge of electric energy raced through me, startling me. She gave me an encouraging nod, and I clasped onto her hand, holding it tight in my own. I returned to reality at the Father's mansion with a splitting screech. The men backed away, hands clapped over their ears. A power unlike any I'd ever known or felt before flowed through me, flowed out of me as I faced each of my attackers with renewed energy. I felt my hand plunge into one man's chest to crush his beating heart still inside him. I felt my energy fill an assailant's brain with so much energy that it overheated to explosion, blood dribbling from his ears as he crumpled to the ground. I felt myself shred 5, 10, 15 more attackers with less energy than it takes to flick on a light switch. With my attackers taken care of, I took a deep breath in, slowly exhaling the rage and power granted to me by the daughters of the precipice. I needed to be in control when I found the children, though I feared a second wave of fathers likely awaited me. As I quietly padded across the room, I noticed one of my assailants still clinging to life, his eyes wide and breaths shallow. Directing my glare at him, I flipped his body over, leaving him face down in a thick pool of his comrade's blood to drown. It seemed fitting. I followed Job's directions down the hallway to a locked door. Busting the lock with a pointed stare, I crept down the stairs the door revealed, anxious for what might await me. What I saw down there, well, it was much worse than I ever anticipated. The room was nearly empty. No children, no people, save for one man sitting, waiting. He just laughed at my shocked expression, my fear for the children. Not what you were expecting? My heart began to race, so it was a trap. Job lied to me, and I'd left my children with him. You're just like all the other daughters. You think you're so smart, think you're better than us? He rambled, shaking his head incredulously. We knew you would find us, knew you'd be stupid enough to come here yourself. We've placed all the boys in homes. We couldn't risk you coming here to slaughter them all. The prophecy will be fulfilled, as it has been foretold. It was my turn to laugh, scoffing at his assumption that I'd come to kill innocent children. The prophecy has been fulfilled, all right? I muttered, immobilizing him in my hold. I didn't know what tricks he might have had up his sleeve, so I couldn't be too careful. My son is the prophecy, yet he's stronger, smarter, and more compassionate than any of you. When the moment of truth came, he thought for himself. He let me go. The cycle is over. You're wrong, he spat, glaring. The others are still out there. They will continue to breed and slaughter you like livestock, believing the prophecy remains unfulfilled. They will find you. They will kill you, and they will take your son. I froze in place as I realized he was right. I thrust his head into the wall behind him before running out of the mansion to get my vehicle. The return trip was no easier than the trip there. I felt as if I had to be on constant surveillance. Worst of all, I had no idea what I was coming home to. The worst-case scenario ran through my mind on repeat. Job had killed Lucia, had taken Eli, had alerted more of the fathers to my location. More likely than not, they would already be there. I was so tired. I didn't have much fight left in me. I should have stopped to sleep, paused to recharge for the attack I knew awaited me. But there was no time to waste if my children were in danger again. The thumping sound coming from my trunk showed me I had even less time than I'd originally hoped. As I finally pulled back into my driveway, The front door swung open. I jumped in my seat, bracing myself for the onslaught I knew I was unprepared for. Instead, Eli ran out, followed by Lucia, then Job. I thrust the door to my car open and stumbled out of the vehicle to meet them, crumbling with exhaustion onto the paved ground. Eli wrapped his arms around me, tears running down his face. "Don't leave again," he cried. Weakly, I held him close as I finally allowed myself to process all that had happened in the past month, to finally grieve the losses I'd faced, the years of life I'd lost to a false curse, the lives I'd taken. Heaving sobs racked my body as Lucia joined the embrace. I snaked one arm around her shoulders. Uncle Job kneeled on the ground behind me to rub an open palm over my back, comforting me. A series of loud thumps rocked the back of the parked car, sent me back into panic. I whipped my head around to glance at Job over my shoulder. "We're not safe," I whispered. "Get the kids inside." He did as I asked. Once I was alone again, I opened the garage door to pull my car inside. Popping the trunk open, I stared down at my captive, the man from the basement. He was bound and gagged, struggling furiously against his restraints. I rammed his head against the floor of the trunk until he was out cold again. I'd come back for him later. I needed a hot shower and a warm meal, needed some time with my family first. Like I said before, he was right. There are still more out there. Still more fathers using the daughters as incubators for a prophecy that had already come. A prophecy of hatred and fear that I will end with all of the compassion and love I have for my son. All of the humanity that exists within him that the fathers couldn't steal. There are still more fathers who would come to harm my family. Still more innocent children in their clutches. In the days since, I've been using my powers to extract information from my captive, healing him just as he starts to slip away. Job and I have already confirmed 3 homes for me to visit once I've gotten enough rest. I'm exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally, and I'm tired of using my powers to harm, but I know I can't stop yet. I know there are more out there like me, more innocent women, more innocent children. Likely more defectors like Job, too. I can't rest until I find and free them all, until I ensure the safety of my family. And I will make damn sure that every woman and girl in my family, every daughter of the precipice, makes it to age 28.